Mm, Maayong. I'm currently doing this. Mm, 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 mm. Sandwich. Hello, everybody. Mm, 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 um, mm, 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 mm. Good morning. So today we're gonna continue with the Destiny lore part 2, from the Awoken up to the end of the awakening of the first Destiny. Good morning, everybody. Why don't we just get started? So let me just may you recap part 1? That is long. Basically, you gotta watch the previous video. But you won't need it, you won't need it. This is still before the start of Destiny 1. So you'll be alright without it. It is still like before the games even start. Let me just music. Hello, one and all. Welcome to Destiny Part 2. I have a little sore on my tongue, so it's a little hard to speak. But it's Destiny Part 2. Let me just put this to the side. Put this in the middle. Put this to the side. Okay. Should we get started or should we wait like 3 minutes? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. You wait 3 minutes. Let me just put some salt on my tongue. This thing really hurts. Alright. Okay, guys. Let's watch Destiny!
In the midst of the collapse, an Exodus program vessel, the Exodus Green, was partway through its journey into the stars. The passengers and crew were meant to form a new outpost of humanity somewhere out in the universe. Their plans were first interrupted by a silent shadow that was stalking their ship through the cold reaches of space. The ship's captain, Alice Lee, hailed the pursuing vessel multiple times to no avail. A phantom pursuer alone would be troublesome enough, but this vessel was likely one of the Black Fleet's pyramid ships, thus spelling an almost certain doom when it caught up with them. Their plans were further altered by the beginning of the collapse. The
Vex offender,
Rasputin dispatched orders to the Exodus Green to begin using its defensive kinetic weapons as artillery and to return to the system to counter the arriving threat. Alice Lee, pursued by a mysterious assailant and being recalled to fight for a system that she would soon not even call home, ignored the Warmind's orders and sought to save her crew. Her defiance would not win her any mercy with her pursuers, which quickly entered weapons range and began to violently grip the vessel with gravity waves. Alice Lee and the rest of the crew were being stretched on a molecular level, torn asunder slowly as they tried to flee desperately. In this moment, Alice Lee sent out every combuoy and antenna that she could possibly extend. She sent out a request into the dark for anything to hear that might care. She declared her intention that her and her crew were to be considered a separate entity from humanity and Sol, a neutral party with no allegiance to Earth. Whether or not this made any difference to their fates is unknown, but there was at least one crew member who was determined to take fate into her own hands. Her name was Mara, and she had seen that soon she was likely to die. She wished to go out on her own terms, so she donned a spacesuit and went out on a long tether from the main vessel. Her brother, Aldwin, as was his nature, followed in her footsteps. As Alice Lee sent out her message, with the Exodus Green surrounded by darkness, a sudden light appeared. In that moment, a clash of primordial forces took place, and the very fabric of the universe buckled. A singularity formed within that clash of light and dark, and it began to drag the Exodus Green into its depths. Seeing his sister in mortal peril, Aldwin reached out and beckoned Mara to return to the Exodus Green. But Mara did not look back. And as the ship and Aldwin and Mara were pulled towards the singularity, the young woman who would one day be one of Sol's mightiest sovereigns cut the cord connecting her to the vessel and reached towards infinity. She would choose her own fate.
Mara,
would be the first.
The first what?
Within the singularity, everything would change. The people of the Exodus Green would awaken on the other side of the singularity, and they would be forever changed by the synthesis of light and dark that they had encountered. Alice Lee was the first to wake, and she discovered Mara Sov next. And as the future queen arose from a cold dream, the two of them beheld what Alice Lee believed to be a world of her own creation. Deep within the singularity, a world had been created. Its rivers flowed like silver, and its endless forests teemed with life uncounted. They called this world the Distributary, and as it was located on the other side of the black hole, it was separated from the ravages of Sol. Inside the singularity, time also passed far more rapidly than it did outside. And so what might be but a second for us might have been 100 years for those that lived in the Distributary.
Oh.
Slowly, Alice Lee and Mara Sov began to wake up the others, until most of the 40,000 or so crew and passengers of the Exodus Green were also roused from their slumber. Their numbers were harshly imbalanced, with the majority of the crew being women. As a result, the society that developed within the Distributary was a matriarchal one, and the men of the new civilization that was born were not often assigned to any positions within their hierarchy that might be considered hazardous in any manner, with their lifespans being practically infinite within the depths of the singularity. These people were functionally immortal.
Cool.
And so each of them would grow to become a fount of knowledge and experience, mastering their many crafts over the thousands of years. With their skin turned hues of blue, grey and purple, these new people strode out across the Distributary and declared themselves to be children of a covenant between the light and dark.
They knew?
They would call themselves the Awoken. The Awoken were immediately split between those of the 891 original remaining crew of the Exodus Green and the 40,000 or so passengers that had simply been colonists in stasis aboard. The 891 were considered to be leaders, and the 40,000 were in many ways subordinate. But regardless, there were questions that all the newly reborn Awoken would be asking about their foundational experience, the existence that they now found themselves in. Answering these questions could determine the balance of power amongst this new people for time in memoriam, and so a council was convened to address all concerns. Chief amongst them was whether the Awoken should return to where they had come from and leave the Distributary, or remain within its bounds to prosper eternally. Those that wished to leave were known as the Ecolists, who believed that the Awoken owed a debt to the cosmos that had saved them from destruction. Those that wished to stay were known as the Sanguine, who believed that the covenant of light and dark that had created the Awoken had been made with the understanding that they would forfeit all right to their history in exchange for a new start here within the Distributary. Alice Lee proudly proclaimed the Sanguine position and declared that the Awoken should go forth and explore the infant cosmos of the Distributary. In secret, Mara Sov would counsel others gathered by her reborn brother Aldrin, and would state that when the time was right, they would all return. Alice Lee would leave this first council in an ascendant position, and proclaimed herself to be the first queen of the Awoken, as she believed herself to be the first of the Awoken to have ever existed. After the many decrees about the Awoken people that day were spoken aloud into covenant and law, Alice Lee made her first command as the queen of this newly reborn people. There would be no lies amongst the Awoken. Little did she know that this well-intentioned first decree would be the source of so much pain, and would also bring about her downfall. As the Awoken people expanded out across the Distributary, some would form tribal groups out by the forests and seas. Predominantly, these people were of the Ecolist persuasion. Those who dwelled in the cities, on the other hand, tended to be of the Sanguine mindset. Unbeknownst to all but a few, the seeds for division were laid in this foundational difference. One day, a woman from the original 891 crew of the Exodus Green came forward with words like fire. She was the Diasarum, and she would loudly proclaim that Alice Lee had committed deicide, the murder of a god. It had long been accepted that Alice Lee had been the creator of the Awoken peoples and the Distributary. The Diasarum stated that Alice Lee could have chosen for all the Awoken to have a divine form, that she had instead chosen to grant them the same mortal form that they had maintained in their past lives. The Diasarim stated that through this choice, Alice Lee had effectively created all Awoken suffering in the universe. She had killed their potential divinity in its crib. The real damage of the statement was not simply the notion that all Awoken had been denied an existence without suffering. It was also that Alice Lee had potentially lied by omission. She was meant to be the queen without secrets, and yet she had kept the most terrible secret for herself. This moment,
where did this come from?
Accusation of the murder of unborn gods would be the event that began the first war of the Awoken, the Theodicy War. Prior to this moment, there had been no need for paladins or protectors, but with the Theodicy War, a Rubicon of conflict was crossed, and the Awoken were changed forever. The war would erode the authority of the queen. She would eventually send Osana Sov, Mara Sov's mother, to negotiate with the Diasarim and sue for peace. When Osana met with the Diasarim, she promised her that her daughter Mara Sov would tell her any secret she desired to know in exchange for peace. And so it was that the Diasarim traveled to meet Mara Sov atop the mountain where she resided, and was never seen again. The questions of what happened and how the Diasarim disappeared persist in the legends here to this day. Did Mara kill her? Did she cease to be, having heard an unimaginable secret? Did she change her ways and choose a new life after having caused the first war?
Wait, the Diasarim kind of feels...
Mara all along? None can be sure, but what we do know is that the Diasarim was most certainly Mara's puppet in this regard. She would allow the Ekalist cause to wither for a time. She did not believe it was the right moment for the Awoken to return, but one day, return they would. Before that time would arrive, Mara would have a chance encounter that would change her life forever. As the Sanguine's faction's truth flourished, their scribes gathered all knowledge, including portents and prophecy, to their side. In this way, they heard the discontent of Mara and Aldrin, who still quietly supported the Ekalist position. To these scholars, they represented something of an existential threat. If Mara were to ever gain power in the future, she could be the spark that started a second Theodicy War. One day, a colossal Awoken warrior would enter the court of some of these scribes, armed with a longbow so massive that only a woman of her unchallenged strength could even string it, let alone draw it to its fullest length. She declared that her name was Sieur Ido, and that she was hunting Mara Sov for the murder of her lady, the Diasarim. The scholars of the Sanguine saw this as a chance to potentially save thousands of lives by taking just one. So they did what they could to direct Sieur, though she would still not find her quarry for a long time. Under the Awoken's second queen, Ngoya Pin, a masked figure would enter the royal court. Wait.
What happened? What happened to the first queen, Alice?
Masked figure under the Awoken's second queen.
What happened to the first queen? Did she die? In exchange? Cause like I thought there was peace in exchange for like a secret.
Ngoya Pin, a masked figure, would enter the royal court. This was Mara in disguise, and she would counsel the queen for a long time, swaying her to become an Ekalist and encouraging her to open her court to all the knowledge of the world. The many scholars gathered there would be set to work in a way that suited Mara's cause. But one day into this court, many years later, Sieur Ido would walk, still furious over the death of the Diasarim, still hunting Mara. But when she found Mara in her laboratory, she was stopped in her tracks. Her fury was suddenly tempered by Mara's grace and beauty. Her hatred wilted, and something else blossomed in its stead. Sieur Ido could not kill Mara.
She fucking folded.
And so she threw down her weapon. She declared that she would wound someone beloved to Mara, thus leaving her forever maimed in spirit, because she could not bear to kill Mara in all her beauty.
What the fuck?
Mara could not refuse this challenge. and so her brother Aldrin became her chosen champion. The two warriors would battle each other with blade, with rifle, and with 5th generation superiority fighters. The news of this duel sent the scribes that had sicked Sieur on Mara into a wild panic. Over the centuries since they had sicked Sieur on Mara, they had found a place in the new Queen's court, and realized that if they were found to have sanctioned this murder, they would be banished. Luckily for these idle scholars, the duel between Aldrin and Sieur would have a most unexpected outcome. When fighting with blades, the brute strength of Sieur was equal to the finesse and footwork of Aldrin. They both fell together, and thus it was a tie. When fighting with rifles, the two warriors fought in the Distributary's great jungles. Whilst Aldrin was the better hunter, Sieur used her disruptive power to brute force a victory, swaying nature's balance against Aldrin, forcing the fauna to expose him. In this way, she secured victory and had been able to severely wound Aldrin in the process. For their final battle, both of them were supplied with any choice of ship that they desired. Sieur had chosen a powerful Ermine TAC interceptor. Aldrin had chosen an outdated ship called a Dart. What Sieur failed to realize was that per the terms of the duel, any weapons that could not be supplied would be simulated instead. The Dart's standard weapon loadout was capable of being switched with an air-to-air nuclear munition.
Okay.
Using this simulated munition, Aldrin
the fuck you say?
From over 80.
Let's duel. I'm gonna use a nuke. You die.
Kilometers away, and Sieur Ido lost before she could even see him.
This shit sucks. Rock, paper, scissors. I choose a gun.
The score was all tied up. Realizing the stalemate, Sieur threw herself before Mara and said that with the tie, her fate was in Mara's hands. She pleaded for a more kind fate than that of the Diasarim, who she had sworn to avenge. Mara approached the humbled warrior and said, "Rise, Sieur Ido. Let us take the stars together." The exact story of the blossoming love between Mara and Sieur is not recorded in complete detail, but given the lifespans of the Awoken were near infinite, it may have been a love that endured as unassailably as the moon and the tides that it brings. Mara would have need of strong confidants, especially for what came next, and few amongst the Awoken were as strong as Sieur Ido. Mara scoured the great archives of the Awoken, looking for knowledge. She had to prove what she already knew, that the Awoken had to return to the greater universe. To do this, she launched countless satellites and instruments of observation into the orbit of the Distributary's planetary gravity. When she had sufficient proof, she would address the Awoken people and tell them of this most fundamental of truths. Mara at this point was the face of the Ekalist belief, and with data to back up her assertion, she would inform the Awoken of the reality that they had to face. Returning to the universe at large would be perilous, and it would pull the Awoken from the Distributary, thus robbing them of their immortality. But Mara's sway over the people was immense. What's more, Mara told them of the fragments that had been retrieved from the observation instruments. What little they had heard indicated that their kin on the other side were in terrible danger, and that the Awoken had escaped the same fate. The Distributary was a refuge, but they had arrived there by escaping a madness more ancient than one might fathom. Despite the danger and the guarantee of embracing mortality, Mara gained the support of tens of thousands of the Awoken, thus granting her the people that she would need for an exploratory expedition back into Sol. Before she left, she deemed that there was one thing she had to do. Mara went to Alice Lee, the first queen of the Awoken.
Okay.
She who had believed the Distributary to be of her design, who the Diasarim had accused so long ago of robbing the Awoken of divinity. to whom Mara had told the first lie.
Oh.
Sitting with her, Mara would tell her the truth. It was not Alice Lee who had created the Distributary. It was not Alice Lee who had been the first amongst their people. It was not Alice Lee who had denied the Awoken their divinity. It was Mara. She was the first. Alice Lee was enraged at the truth, knowing now that Mara had engineered all that had happened across the history of the Awoken, knowing that all the suffering of their people was her fault, knowing that Mara was guilty of the very thing she herself had been accused of, an accusation so strong that it sparked anew the concept of war itself in a universe unblemished by it. Alice Lee would then throw her support behind Mara's expedition from that moment, not out of agreement, but so that she could rid the Distributary of Mara forever. The last thing she called Mara was the devil. After some preparation, the expedition would be successful and Mara would return to Sol. It was then that she discovered
Wait, hold on. Do you get to go to the Distributary in Destiny?
In utter chaos, she quickly established habitats and outposts within the reaches of what had been known as the asteroid belt. It was now strewn with the abandoned derelict vessels that had fled during the collapse, only to be destroyed by the Black Fleet. A foul reef of dead ships.
Oh,
Mara's Utex, the same group that would one day become the Techians, also discovered that various members of the Awoken expedition had developed new powers upon leaving the Distributary. These powers manifested most strongly in Mara, and Mara was in herself like an amplifier to those around her.
Okay, you know what? Mara is actually really pretty.
It did not take long for Mara to proclaim herself as the new sovereign of this people, of the Awoken of...
Damn, okay, she kinda hot.
The Reef. There were, however, many who wished to immediately depart for Earth and to assist their long-lost brethren.
She's kinda hot.
Mara urged caution and believed that they needed to build up a stable base of power first. Many vehemently disagreed with her. There were even riots on the matter, which momentarily plunged the Reef into chaos. Exploiting this opportunity, a new set of interlopers descended on the Awoken.
Oh.
Through the many painful years of the Long Drift, the Elixni had arrived in Sol, more vicious and tenacious than they had ever been before. These Fallen would momentarily clash with the Awoken, and Mara, Sieur, and Aldrin had to rally their people to fight off the invaders. As the raiders were fought back, some of the Awoken had taken the opportunity to act on their desires, and a vessel was quickly launched away from the Reef before anyone could stop it. Seeing her control start to wither, Mara relented. The Awoken would be given one choice each. They could either remain in the Reef under her rule and build towards a future for the system on their own terms, or they could leave now and assist humanity at the cost of never returning again. Thus, the Awoken, who had already been torn apart by those who left the Distributary and those who stayed, were riven once again into the Reef-born and Earth-born Awoken. Those who left Mara's control would go on to do an immeasurable amount of good for the people of Earth. Many would even be judged as being worthy of becoming guardians upon their death. But the world that they had emerged into would be a terrifying one. Where before humanity's golden age had stood, now there was only ruins, rust, and the remains of those who had died in the collapse.
Damn. Or is it time? Is it time for us? Not yet. The Dark Age.
As the Awoken were given their choice, and some of them made their way to Earth, they found a solar system in turbulent chaos. The Black Fleet and its disciples had been pushed back, but there were many other threats that rose in their absence. It isn't known who arrived first or exactly when. Records from this time are scant and next to non-existent. Such was the nature of history and technology. There would be no true date-keeping or timeline from this moment onwards. There would only be the vicious clawing cycle of night and day, season to season. What we do know is that of the forces that appeared in Sol, the Awoken were clearly not the first. The Elixni's long drift had come to a close, but not all of them had universally settled in the asteroid belt, as the Awoken had discovered. Arriving in Sol, many of the different houses of the Elixni would spread out across the system to claim new territories. The House of Devils would claim Earth's cosmodrome. The House of Rain would claim the sun-soaked fields of Mercury.
Looks beautiful.
The House of Winter would claim the Ishtar Sink on Venus. And the House of Wolves would claim territory in the Jovian moons. Hardy scavengers and survivors that they were, the Elixni's resilient physiology allowed them to survive almost anywhere, so long as there were enough resources for their servitors to turn into ether. But at this point, they were more than just scavengers content to pick over the bones of our civilization. They were drawn here by the traveler, and in their exodus from Reef, many houses had developed into warbands ruled by despots. None were as infamous as the first known Kell of the House of Devils, Akalux, who had taken the action that led the Exodus fleet of the Elixni on the long drift in the first place. It was he who would plunder what had once been Golden Age London and burn it to the ground before taking his house eastward to the European plains and the rich hunting grounds of Baikonur.
London is dead.
Fallen were not the
London has fallen! Oh my fucking god! London has fallen!
I'm either. Having been drawn there by the fall of Nezarek's pyramid, Hive forces under the banner of Crota would begin to infest the moon, where they constructed a massive pit. This pit would eventually be turned into a terrifying subterranean fortress with dozens of different offshoots, catacombs, and ritual chambers.
The fuck was he doing in the pit?
We know it then as the Hellmouth. From here, Crota would create the infrastructure necessary to stage a long-scale Hive invasion of Earth. When the time was right, from this fortress and its attached facilities, Hive cedar vessels would be launched in the direction of Earth, and thousands upon thousands of Crota's brood would invade. The Hellmouth's construction had been built in a downwards fashion for another reason, though. Crota's forces were intent on reaching the Pyramid of Nezarek, but much as they tried to gain access, they were always denied by the pyramid itself, and so they collected in its shadow, like a roiling colony of ants, with dreams of stellar conquest and dark gods. Crota's father was not far behind, as many of Oryx's servants are often found in proximity of those worlds blessed by the light. As he had done many times before, he quietly established his presences throughout the system, seeding worlds with his forward armies, advance broods on Earth, the Jovians, the asteroid belt, and beyond. They would prepare for the day when Crota's army was ready, and would bring forth great tribute in the king's name. Whilst some
every fucking race super hated us.
Were subtle, others,
well, we did have the travelers, so it makes sense,
were utterly blunt. None more so than the Cabal. Multitudes of scout legions sent by Dominus Gaul arrived in Sol, including the Sand Eaters, Dust Giants, Siege Dancers, Blind Legion, and Skyburners. Together, they would collectively lay claim to Mars and spread their forces across its surface to rapidly establish a series of heavily entrenched bases and battle lines. Their control over the moon of Phobos was so complete that they were able to establish an entire fleet base there, Fleet Base Kouros, a staging ground for the Skyburners and their vessels, and a defensive hub that would coordinate the operations of the Cabal throughout the system. There were indications that even these initial scout legions were capable of some terrifying levels of destruction on a planetary scale. With that in mind, one of their most powerful assets was probably a trio of Scion Flayers that had evolved into their greater forms. This trio, known as the Ice Reapers, was responsible for intelligence gathering and the retrieval of advanced technology, but their psionic powers were also put to display in a most prominent fashion. the flares began to pull Mars's moon of Phobos into an unnaturally low orbit to the point where you could prominently see it in the Martian sky. Supposedly, this was to be used as a weapon of last resort that could be deorbited from Mars, thus destroying the entire planet if the campaign was going badly. Such force feels excessive, but it is characteristically the Cabal way, and their powerful munitions and strong logistics operation would allow them to contend with the awakening of the oldest beings within Sol. Deep within the cores of many of our planets and moons, lakes of radiolarian fluid began to flow with a renewed purpose. All across the system, from Venus to Mercury to Mars, the Vex began to awaken. The Ishtar Collective had previously discovered them on Venus in the Ishtar Sink, and had determined that their ruins had been there for billions of years. Now those ruins began to spring to life, and Vex began to emerge from those ruins to accomplish the inscrutable goals of the Vex. Whilst many worlds were blighted by the Vex, some, such as Mercury, were completely overrun. Mercury's core was consumed and completely hollowed out to create a giant Vex simulation engine known as the Infinite Forest. The once lush paradise and breadbasket of the system that Mercury had been was transformed into a blasted wasteland pocked with the stony spires and metallic plating of Vex installations. And then, at the heart of it all, there was humanity. Broken, fractured, surrounded, and desperate. The collapse had been a body blow to us.
You're supposed
as a species,
to chest
now faced the
shot
grueling
them,
task of surviving
not
the hostile
headshot them.
system that had once been our dominion. Whilst the whole of humanity was threatened, there was one group who found themselves in an utterly unique situation. On the edges of the system, the Exodus Indigo had landed on Neptune, having been damaged by an attack on their vessel by one of the disciples of the Witness, or what is presumed to be a disciple. On Neptune, they were able to use their ship's supplies, including a small amount of Seaver, to establish a basic colony, and then came the remarkable discovery that Savathun had left for them: the Veil. Amongst the number of the Exodus Indigo were the Ishtar Collective researchers Chioma Essie and Maya Sundaresh. They would set about studying the Veil and would eventually find a way to derive power from it, even though it would have many adverse effects on many of the EXO members of their crew. It didn't take long for the Vex to discover them, and whilst they would be able to push into Neomuna's outer defenses, they were consistently stopped by the energy emitted by the Veil itself. In response to this, the Vex created a simulation that was woven into Neptune's electromagnetic field. This hid all in proximity of the Veil and the Veil itself, thus preventing any humans within that area from being detected by the outside world for a long time. It would also cut them off from any potential reinforcements. But this worked out well for the fledgling colony on Neptune.
Oh yeah, this sci-fi place!
And to secure their prosperity in the time being. The screen hiding them from all of the events of the system meant that they were in relative isolation. Thus, with their infrastructure and their defenses starting to be built up,
bro, this was the Crucible place.
Was born. One of its earliest residents, a woman named Michaela Eulaha, was exposed to some of the technology that had been brought with them on the Exodus Indigo. In particular, she was exposed to a strange series of nanites from Siva. The nanites infected her body and violently changed it, causing her to grow metal plating across parts of her body, giving her remarkable strength and incredible speed, as well as the ability to regenerate. She used this accident to her advantage and became a vicious fighting force against Neomuna's Vex invaders. Though she would only live for about 10 years after the accident, she would be known from then on as the Strider, and her selfless actions were the creation point for the Cloud Strider organization. As time went on, the establishment of the Cloud Striders was made far more entrenched. They had a device that they would eventually use called the Sidereal, and that would allow them to create new Cloud Striders. But given the nature of the experimental technology being used, only 2 Cloud Striders would be created at a time. One of the later Cloud Striders, by the call sign of Stargazer, would head out on a mission to Earth in order to make contact with any remnants of humanity that they could find. They had hoped to find segments of human civilization that they could establish diplomatic communications with, perhaps even uplifting them to rejoin humanity on Neomuna. What they discovered on Earth was anarchy. Earth's people had not been as fortunate as Neptune's, and many of them had been eking out a living from what little remained. Worse still were those that had been blessed by the Traveler's light. In these early Dark Age days, there was little to stop a light bearer with a ghost from being considered a god. Every time someone killed them, they could be brought back from the grave. With their ability to defy death and with the paracausal abilities that they had been gifted with their light, some of them quickly rose to become regional rulers.
What?
These were
They
some of
were
the
bad.
first warlords.
They were bad.
Who used their powers
light
to
bearers.
impose their will over others and dominate the world.
There were
as they
bad
saw
light
fit.
bearers.
The Cloud Strider, known as Stargazer, would encounter a warlord at some point, and they were followed by a small army numbering in the hundreds. They shot the warlord and retreated with their team inside a Warmind bunker.
Guardian.
Before destroying the bunker to prevent its harmful weapons from getting into the hands of their aggressors, Stargazer petitioned one of Rasputin's surviving submines, Malahiyati, to delete all references across the Warmind network to Neptune and the Exodus Indigo. This would keep the presence of Neomuna truly secure and would make us blissfully unaware of its existence for hundreds of years. When Stargazer returned to Neomuna, they were ready to inform the populace of their findings, and for the longest time, it would be the belief of all Neomuni that Earth was merely a lawless frontier filled with tyrants and warlords, and those trying desperately to survive. For the longest time, they would have been right to believe such a thing too, for in the earliest days of the Dark Age, war ravaged the entire system, and nobody was truly safe. The Neomuni were not the only ones to note this. The Awoken were keenly aware that the system was treacherous. It was for this reason that Mara Sov sent out her brother,
You've been
Aldrin,
resurrected.
to seek a
Why
source
were
of
they
power for
chosen
her
by the
that was
Traveler
unique
if they
in
were
this system,
bad?
thus granting her an asymmetric advantage. Aldrin scoured the system and returned with a mysterious paracausal creature, a wish dragon.
The hell?
Also known as an Ahamkara, these beasts were shapeshifters capable of completely altering their form. The Ahamkara were also armed with a terrible power, wish magic.
Wish
Paracausal
magic?
ability
That's weird.
that allowed them to read the desires of their prey and then grant their wishes, whilst also twisting the threads of fate to do so. Unfortunately, in the twisting of such wishes, Faustian bargains would be created. Thus, petitioning a wish dragon for one's desire was a perilous process requiring great discipline. The creature that Aldrin had discovered and presented to Mara called itself Riven in honor of its new hosts, honoring the twice Riven Awoken. But it was not alone. Wish dragons populated the system on almost every planet, but were particularly concentrated on Venus. Together, Riven and Mara would set about creating a grand home for the Awoken and the Ahamkara. Mara declared that they would be more than survivors, though. They would be a people.
The other crucible place.
Through Mara's vision and Riven's magic, the Awoken would build a place worthy of their people, the Dreaming City. This would not be the Awoken capital, but it would be one of their most holy sites, a place for them to learn, connect with their ancestors, and meditate on the nature of the world. Ahamkara would flock to the Dreaming City, and they would live alongside the Awoken for a time in a mostly peaceful, albeit cautious, symbiosis. Yet another secret enclave was constructed in Sol, but this time on Earth. There was no place for people to run to, not yet at least. In those early days, refugee caravans trailed across
when
the
we get
world,
kicked out of the
looking
tower.
for anywhere that they might find some degree of safety. Some would attempt to establish small settlements and towns like Palamon or Coyote, and whilst these places would be home to some, they were not fated to last. Fallen raiders, rogue light-bearers, and the wilderness of the frontier would be the forces that eventually spelled doom to these settlements. Hope was scarce indeed, but slowly from the ashes of ruin and death, a spark of hope would be kindled. One day, a group of 5 warlords set a village to the torch. Another group of light-bearers made their presence known that day, and at great cost they defeated the would-be tyrants and vowed that there would be no more death. There would be no more without protectors. Humanity needed its protectors. And so it was that these first 4 light bearers present on this day would become some of humanity's first great guardians. Radagast, Perun, Yolda, and Saladin would be counted among the very first of the Iron Lords. In time, they would bring more legendary figures into the fold: Silumar, Gelion, Scori, Timur, Ephrodite, and Felwinter. And when Felwinter was folded into the Iron Lords, he agreed that they would be able to use his peak. Though he kept the name of Felwinter Peak, from it the Iron Temple was born, and Earth had its first small enclave of relative safety for some. But it would not be the last, and luckily it would be maintained even though Silumar had to rebuild it multiple times. The names of the Iron Lords would be honored within the Iron Temple under an ironwood tree, and those names would stand in legendary regard amongst Guardians even to this day. This was the first knightly order that would bring some semblance of control and peace to the world. They would challenge the warlords and drive them back. Under the tutelage of the original Iron Lords, many great heroes would be molded into the finest protectors of humanity, one way or another. Not least amongst their number would be an awoken man of great
Zavala,
called Zavala, and a strange human of impatient disposition and great knowledge called Osiris.
Osiris!
The heroes of Earth had begun to make their mark, but the people of Earth still needed a true place to call home, and the Iron Temple was not large enough for the whole of humanity. For so many, there was but one place they could go, one place more obvious than any other. They went to that strange place where the traveler had made its final stand. In the shadow of this broken god, humanity's remnants would begin to regroup. The refugee camp grew and grew, and eventually their numbers swelled to the point where everyone needed to be properly organized. And in this moment, we nearly destroyed ourselves once again. From the huddled masses, there were inevitably different perspectives on what had to be done. We should make ready to leave Earth for good. We should stake our claim and choose strong leaders to guide us. We should prepare for war. Each of these different ideas in turn attracted more and more people. Eventually, they attracted Lightbearers, and before the camp had even truly been able to establish itself, there were factions within its boundaries. And as these factions began to clash, Lightbearer would eventually fight Lightbearer. It was in this time that the division within this fledgling refugee camp gave a perfect opportunity for the Fallen to arrive and plunder the great host of human survivors. They did not know the true power of the Guardians on that day, though, and in the face of an external threat, the factions were able to put aside their differences and repel the invaders. These skirmishes were known as the Faction Wars, and they nearly destroyed the only home humanity had on Earth. A leader would need to step forward. Someone would need to organize them. But it would not take long for the Elixni to return. This time, though, they would return in strength. The Faction Wars may have been the first time that this new fledgling city had seen battle, but it would not be the last. As more and more Guardians returned and as more and more walls were being erected to defend what was this small refugee encampment, eventually, the House of Devils saw a moment to strike. This would be the first great conflict between the Elixni and humanity on such a scale, and for the Fallen, it was dramatically important. They had seen that the Traveler had settled on Earth. They had seen that it had died for this other people. They had even seen that it had sheltered them beneath its great bulk.
He's so jealous!
It had granted its gift, its blessing, to the various members of that civilization even beyond its own death. For the Fallen, this was not just a religious war. This was their moment to prove that they were still worthy of the great machine.
It's me! You should love me!
Upon the city in numbers. The defense of the city
I am
under
more
this
worthy!
barrage of fallen artillery was mostly conducted by Guardians, though some rudimentary frames and some members of the civilian population would be armed. In this terrifying fight, this first battle, there would be 6 different fronts, and the many Guardians that would hold those different fronts would not let even a single one break. Thus the battle was known as the Battle of the Six Fronts. And from this moment, the city would truly emerge.
Ooh, city music.
It was humanity's first true victory, and many legendary guardians, such as Commander Zavala, Saint 14, Lord Shaxx, and Osiris would emerge as legends on that day, having defended the city with their vicious light. It was also in this moment that many other legends
I call this one.
A speaker had come forward.
I've seen enough.
Who could supposedly hear the traveler's voice. And what's more,
my man,
he had begun to organize the Last City properly. There were factions within our ranks, and there were various light bearers.
My man, the speaker.
It was clear now that the light bearers were split across 3 disciplines: hunters, titans, and warlocks. The speaker created a vanguard, a group of 3 individuals, one representing each discipline. Titans were heavily clad in the greatest of armor and favored more brutish aspects of martial combat. Their will to charge the enemy was only tempered by their instinct to defend those in need. Hunters were nomadic and free-spirited. They often roamed alone or in small posses, acting as scouts on the wild frontiers of Earth or beyond, or bold adventurers, willing to disregard authority and their own safety for a little glimmer and glory.
A little glimmer.
Warlocks quickly became known for their wisdom and sheer arcane power. Of all the different classifications of Lightbearer, their connection to the Traveler was the fiercest. And through that connection, they would unearth grand arcana and forge new techniques of light. These Lightbearers
Destiny!
would no longer be known as Lightbearers, though. Thanks to their defense of this fledgling city, the Lightbearers had earned themselves a title. It would define them for the rest of their existence. They would be known as Guardians.
Eyes up, Guardians!
The Vanguard were drawn from their number. Thus, Saint 14, Osiris, and Tallulah Fairwind ascended to be the first ever mentors of the Vanguard, the Titans, Warlocks, and Hunters respectively. And as for the factions, they were also looped in. Whilst they had nearly destroyed the Last City during the faction wars, they still represented many important perspectives. And so, with them in mind, the speaker would take a look to see which ones were worth representing. Those that had directly instigated violence were exiled permanently. But those that had not, and those that had peacefully laid down their arms, would be allowed to continue persisting. Of the many that petitioned to be represented more directly, there were 3 that were most popular: the Concordat, the New Monarchy, and the Dead Orbit. Their perspectives would be represented on a consensus council. They would be at the heart of government within the consensus at large, that was also joined by the Vanguard members and the speaker.
Imagine if governments actually had cool logos like this.
That also consisted of any other citizens and other factions within the city. Those such as the Future War Cult or the Symmetry were represented here in addition. This was by far the greatest echo of the Battle of the Six Fronts, the union of humanity's light-bearing defenders and those who would represent the civilian population into a government was a significant step forward for humanity. But it wouldn't be the only echo. The Six Fronts for which the battle was given its name were held predominantly by 4 Titan orders. As best we know, they were the Pilgrim Guard, the Firebreak Order, the Stoneborn Order, and the First Pillars. Regardless of which of these orders were present on that day, we do know that the defense of this fledgling city on 6 fronts by 4 orders of Titans is the reason for Titan heraldry being what it is, a hexagon of 6 sides with 4 different divided pieces to it. Their heraldry has always remembered 6 fronts. It is one of their proudest achievements to defend the Last City without a single one of these fronts breaking. And as it began to grow, this fledgling city that had once been nothing but a refugee camp simply became known as the Last City.
The last city.
Safe haven for humanity in Sol, as best we knew at the time. Whilst there were some amongst the Titan Orders who lamented the way that 6 fronts ended, in particular the Firebreak, who wished that they could have their glorious charge into the ranks of the retreating Fallen, There were many other dangers throughout the system, and soon the Guardians would be rallied to deal with them. In particular, securing the city's defenses would allow us to turn our eyes to the rest of the system. There were terrible things happening on Venus. In particular, the Ahamkara was starting to transform it. We didn't understand why at the time, but it is likely that this is thanks to the intervention of the Nine. And from what we had seen, we had realized the power of these terrible beasts was a threat that we could not allow to exist. And so the order was given. The Guardians would hunt down the Ahamkara and bring about their extinction. It was not an easy choice to make. Guardians had gained power from their bargains, but much had also been lost, and Ahamkara bargains were notoriously Faustian. The Ahamkara would be hunted down and made extinct. The terrible weight of this decision would be a stain upon Guardian history for all our days. Thankfully, though, we weren't truly efficient. For all the Guardians that did hunt down dragons, there would be many that didn't return. And there were rumors that some escaped the hunt, though the Cryptarchy mostly dismissed this as nothing but superstition. But the Guardians never found Riven. Marasov had hid her away in the Dreaming City, and at long last, she had found her unique source of power. But this was not the only tragedy that would befall the Lightbearers in the Dark Age. As what one might consider to be the Dark Age drew to a close, the Iron Lords were making significant progress in cutting down their warlord aggressors. Earth was starting to fall under one banner where human territory was concerned, and the Iron Lords were doing a decent job at uniting humanity. And then, they discovered something. The Iron Lord warlock, known as Fellwinter, was searching relentlessly for Siva alongside Lord Timur. The nanotechnology that was meant to all but guarantee the self-sufficiency of humanity would be a grand prize. In fact, for many of the Iron Lords, it would be an obsession. Eventually, Fellwinter discovered where to find it, and he also discovered something about himself. He learned that he was a Siddhartha Golem, an exo risen to be Rasputin's eyes and ears within humanity, effectively a spy, but more accurately, someone who would be able to keep tabs on human civilization and for Rasputin to learn from. But when Fellwinter was destroyed and then risen again as a light bearer, what little of Rasputin that remained on Earth was incensed and enraged. Continuously, Fellwinter would be the target of orbital strikes and strange attacks from any Warmind installation that he went near to. Fellwinter was in many cases like a son to Rasputin, and what little of him had recognized Fellwinter in that moment was jealous of the Traveler for having stolen his son, or what he would think of as his son. And like so many jealous fathers, Rasputin would seek to punish his offspring. Eventually, with much work and dedication, Fellwinter would discover that there was a production site for Siva nanites in the eastern section of the Cosmodrome. This was what the Iron Lords had been looking for. It represented a way to lift the people of humanity out of squalor and to return us to the Golden Age. The Iron Lords descended upon the Cosmodrome in force at the order of their leader, but first amongst equals, Lord Radagast. More than 100 Iron Lords descended upon the Cosmodrome, but what they found that day was not Siva as a tool, but Siva as a plague. Siva had been given orders upon noticing the intrusion and presence of Fellwinter. These orders came from the remnant of Rasputin that controlled it. It was a series of orders contained in only 3 words. 3 words that Rasputin would live to learn and regret till the end of his life. Replicate, eliminate, immunize. The nanites were unleashed as weapons, and there was nothing that the Iron Lords could do. Over 100 Iron Lords descended into that place, which would one day be called the Plague Lands. Of those 100 or so that entered, there would be only 2 survivors that day, Lord Saladin Forge and Lady Ephrodite. Siva production was momentarily stopped. The Iron Lord Yolda had taken an explosive device deep into the Siva replication complex, and she had managed to detonate it just as everyone was being consumed by the nanites. But even in their failure, the legend of the Iron Lords lived on. Partly as a cautionary tale, partially as a heroic one. And they were not alone. The lost city.
I thought he was cool.
Tragedy of humankind, that from its humble beginnings, legends would rise, and with them, there would be a chance for humanity to prosper once again.
He was cool in Disney too. The City Age.
Something that regularly proves to be a frustration when talking about Destiny's lore and its timelines is that in the relatively early dates, before the actual foundation of the city, after the collapse, and from then on onwards, there are very few actual references to actual dates. The people of Earth had little time to record keep, and as they fled for their lives, the days bled into each other, the months bled into each other. Thus, it is often hard to determine where one age begins and another has ended. There is no greater example of this than with the transition from the Dark Age to the City Age. Some say it began with the completion of the first of the city's walls. Others say it began at the conclusion of the Battle of the Six Fronts. Others still believe that it began with the formation of the Consensus. No matter the truth, the result is the same. The Guardians had arisen to find their city alive and with hope for the future. And in their noble defense of the lost city, the Guardians would push out into the wilds to deal with strange and deadly forces that had plagued our worlds. A new order was a real possibility that at last lay within reach. Or so they thought back in the days of the City Age. These moments might have been separated by days, they might have been separated by centuries, but regardless, we know from the legends that stand before us even to this day that they did happen. There are small hints as to the chronology of things, but still, there are moments where things might be inaccurate. So, with that in mind, the events are chronicled in this order, as I believe they are indeed the correct order. There must have been first a time of peace, where Guardians were allowed to reflect on their greatness, and when the city was assured of the supremacy of its defenders. It is perhaps the only thing that makes sense, because of the hubris of what happened next. The city was keen to expand its territory further. It started with small expeditions to the outer worlds of the system, and to the inner core. In particular of note, Saint 14 had been tasked with leading one such group of survivors to try and recolonize Mercury, before realizing that it was overrun by the House of Rain. Whilst these initial failures had slowed them down, the lost city was still looking to reclaim humanity's lost wonders.
Okay, falling.
Set their sights in the same place that pre-Golden Age humans had long ago. They looked to the moon, our one true celestial neighbor within striking distance. The initial reports suggested that Luna was hive territory, with something of a ragtag fallen presence there too. The Consensus was committed to securing a foothold on the moon and retaking it for humanity, and even as they suddenly realized that it was also home to the hive, they did not believe they could be stopped. But in the meeting where the forces were being committed to war, and where the Consensus was ready to vote on an invasion of the moon, they were interrupted by a guardian called Lord Shax, a former warlord of great renown and power. Shax was one of the most tested battlefield commanders in the city, and he knew in his gut that the assault on the moon was a terrible idea. He had seen what the hive could do. He remembered a key victory that the city had fought against them, a conflict that they had barely won. It was known as the Battle of the Burning Lake, and there Shax had witnessed firsthand the power of the hive's blades, and understood that in them there was a potential answer to the light of Guardians. They were not like any other force in Sol. They could summon the true powers of darkness to their side. But despite his pleas, Lord Shax was ignored, and the Guardians of the Lost City began to assemble into the greatest army of Guardians that had ever been seen. A host of thousands would assemble under the banner of the Cormorant Seal, led by the Praxic Order, and they would march on Luna with the intent of reclaiming humanity's stellar birthright.
Stellar birthright.
War such as the Thunderlord and its sisters Abaddon and the Nova Mortis were created in preparation for the assault.
That sounds so sick.
The great liberation of Luna, but it would be known instead as the Great Disaster. Upon their arrival, the forces of Guardians would spread out to capture their objectives, and would encounter fierce resistance from the bands of Fallen that they came across. But when they hit the depths of Luna, then things would change. The hit and fade tactics of the Fallen would be troublesome, but they were merely a band of exiles trying to scrape out a living on the moon's harsh surface. The real threat below were Luna's true rulers. When the armies of the Hive emerged to engage the Guardians, the battle that would commence was titanic in scale. The Guardians would see the strength of this terrible power firsthand, and would be forced to face their champion at the height of his power. Crota had arrived, and his brood washed over the army of the Cormorant Seal like a tide. With his sword, the Darkest Edge, in hand, Crota personally slew some of the last city's greatest champions, including Wei Ning, one of the greatest titans that ever lived. Their light was drained by his blade, and their ghosts would be crushed into screaming knives that he used to murder them. At Mara Ibrium, where the greatest part of the battle took place, Crota fought with 1,000 knights at his back. The skies themselves turned green with soulfire, and when Crota's sword fell, it cracked the surface of the moon, creating deep green fissures that remain to this day. The Guardians were pushed back, and then routed entirely. A general retreat was sounded. The battle was lost. Following this moment, the consensus, tail between its legs and realizing its mistake too late, declared that there would be an interdiction zone on the moon and within all cislunar space. No operations on the moon were to be sanctioned by the Vanguard, and Guardians venturing there would receive no further logistical or operational support. The moon was lost, and humanity's dream of reclaiming their Golden Age heritage was promptly shattered.
Damn, that sucks.
Despite this, vengeance was a desire that burned in the chests of many Guardians. None more so than Ariana III, who had seen her lover, Wei Ning, die at Crota's hands. A vision given to her by a wizard that she had interrogated on the moon showed her this exact moment. Alongside her friend Eris Morn, a renowned hunter, she sought the knowledge of her enemy, which she would use to destroy them. She would find herself then in the company of the one person who truly had that knowledge, an exiled master of Hive Arcana, the warlock Toland, the Shattered. Toland would join them and advised them on their return trip to the moon, but he did not disclose his true intentions till it was far too late. He was obsessed with the Hive's sword logic and believed it to be the proof of their supremacy throughout the universe, and so it was that this three was joined by the other half of their fire team, the six that would go on to assault Crota, the first Crota fire team: Ariana III, Eris Morn, Toland the Shattered, Omar Agar, Sai Mota, and Vel Tarlo. They would return to the moon and assault the Hellmouth to avenge those fallen at Mara Ibrium. 6 of them went down into the pit. Only one would crawl out. Vel Tarlo and Sai Mota would fall at the hands of the Hive, be they the Darkblade's thrall or the clawing screams of Omnigul. Omar Agar would be captured and broken, torn upon the rack by Crota's heart, a wizard whose intent was torture, and who stripped the light from his very being in strands to be fed Crota's rising brood. Only Ariana and Toland would make it to the deepest part of the Hellmouth, to the stills, where no light reaches. They crossed into Crota's throne world, where Toland heard Yut the Death Singer, and died in body, though not in spirit. It isn't clear whether Ariana would face Crota or not, but there are hints that this moment might have indeed occurred. Rumor has it that in her final moments, she seemed as wholly luminescent as the sun itself. Alas, Crota's darkness was greater. Only Eris Morn would survive, thanks to the sacrifice of her ghost Briar. In the deepest parts of the Hive's lunar fortress, lost in its catacombs with the darkness closing in all around her, she clutched at something that she had kept close all this time, a relic of the Great Hunt against the Ahamkara. a shard of dragon bone. Even the remains of the wished dragons are potent enough to grant the desires of those that wield them, and in this moment, Eris's desire was great. She had lost her sight, lost her light, and lost her ghost. She wished for deliverance, and perhaps for revenge. And then black tears of terrible darkness began to drip from her eyes. She had already been robbed of her sight, but now at least it seemed as though she knew the way. She would steal the eyes of an acolyte, and for 100 years she persisted in the Hellmouth, until the fateful day when one day she might find a chance to crawl out and be the arm of vengeance returned at last. That would not be for some time. The city had suffered greatly at the hands of its foes. There was trouble brewing within its own walls as well. Back at the Battle of the Six Fronts, Osiris' appointment to the Consensus was one of the earlier causes for a great degree of turmoil. The Concordat initially had frustrations with the Great Warlock. Osiris was often too consumed with his own work to attend Vanguard meetings, and the Concordat had more strange, specific complaints. Whether they were true or slander isn't known to this day. Osiris was consumed by his study of the Vex, and he believed that they were the greatest existential threat to humanity in the Lost City. The speaker saw them as little more than a distraction keeping Osiris from his duties, and worse still, the two of them vehemently disagreed.
Isn't there a curse of Osiris or something?
Osiris often challenged the speaker's authority, something the speaker could not easily abide. The Consensus and the Lost City have always been a political place as well as a place of refuge, and in such a setting, a man like Osiris would gain a reputation beyond the reality of who he was. His controversial words and beliefs would be described by some as heretical, but others would see them as prophetic. Ultimately, this created a division of sorts within the city, and some would disregard his words entirely, whilst others believed that he spoke hidden truths in defiance of the speaker. A cult of personality was starting to form, with some openly proclaiming themselves to be Osiris's followers, much to Osiris's frustration. He knew he was no prophet. He saw himself as one simply trying to convey knowledge of the coming future. The people were twisting his words through reckless abandon and the desire to create sensationalism out of fact. And so he resolved to cut through the perspectives with knowledge. He resolved to write his findings down and collate them in the book, much against the warnings of his pupil, Ikora Ray, another powerful warlock. Osiris believed that he would add objectivity to the situation by doing this, but in reality, the release of these findings that he had made only became far worse. Osirian cultists began to distribute his findings en masse, calling them parables and prophecies. The speaker saw this and believed that it was a brewing insurrection, or at least a disagreement amongst the people of the Lost City that might boil over. He spoke to Saint 14, and despite Saint's urgings, he demanded that all copies of Osiris's writings should be burned. But this was only the beginning. Osiris still believed that the speaker wasn't listening to his warnings. He was correct, but his irritation with Osiris had gone even further at this point, and it had prevented him from listening to even Ikora, who was standing in for Osiris at consensus meetings. This inaction, as Osiris saw it, had even gone so far as to weaken the city. Osiris claimed that in particular, the defenses of the Lost City were weak around an area known as Twilight Gap, a prescient prediction, though none would know it until much later. The speaker reached his breaking point as the divisions between those that followed Osiris and those that rejected him were growing to a boiling point. In a full session of the consensus, the speaker moved to exile the warlock Osiris.
Damn, the speaker!
The motion was presented in all its grandeur with a great speech by the speaker, and just as Osiris was about to be exiled, he arrived and declared that he would leave the Lost City regardless, imposing himself in a time of exile. Ikora Ray from that day onward would hold his position as the Warlock Vanguard. Followed by his ghost Sagira, Osiris would head to Mercury to understand the Vex better and to prepare to face them should the need arise. A gaggle of cultist followers would leave the city too, heading out into the wilds to make their homes beyond the Speaker's influence. Some of them even followed Osiris to Mercury and set up a camp within the Caloris spires. Losing a few cultists is one thing, but Osiris's exile left tangible scars on the fabric of the city beyond even just a few people leaving. It was the first time that an internal force had split the city since the time of the faction wars. It was the first time it had truly been a single man. It was the first time it had been a guardian that had caused it.
Yeah, I like the Speaker.
Spilled over into real conflict, it had split some of the guardians from the Speaker's authority. Osiris's influence had started to inspire guardians to act independently of the authority of the Vanguard.
Oh boy.
This weakened the city, as some of the legends that we had known for so long as great defenders instead headed out into the wilds and never returned. Most notable of those would be those who followed on from Osiris's words that the Vex were indeed the most dangerous threat to the last city and humanity. Of them, the most infamous were the Hunter Pahanin, the Warlock Pradith, and the Titan known as Kabir the Legionless. These three would head to Venus, to the most infamous fortress of the Vex that had been around in Sol for billions of years. They attempted to infiltrate and destroy the Vault of Glass. So it was that they entered, but only one came out. The Hunter Pahanin witnessed the power of the Vex and was forced to flee against it, being haunted by it for the rest of his days. The Warlock Pradith of the future war cult was lost within the deepest reaches of the Vault, and was imprisoned there seemingly for all eternity. The Titan Kabir was beaten back by the Templar, and then drank of Vex Radiolaria, thus enabling himself to be consumed by the Vex completely, and to become one with them. Before he died, he did at least manage to drain what light of his remained into a shield, a paracausal force known as the Aegis that would break the unbreakable and let the light into the vault. Thus, some of humanity's greatest heroes would fall. Long ago, such individual legends being lost might have been born by the lost city, but now they were occurring just as humanity was about to face its greatest test yet. Out in the system, scouts amongst the hunters had noticed significant fallen troop movement for some time. This was no coincidence. Long had the houses waited and watched the traveler with envy. They had always plotted the downfall of the city, but doing so was no small feat. After the failure of the House of Devils at the Battle of the Six Fronts, it was clear that the lost city could not be taken easily. Not a single fallen house would be able to assail the Guardians in their own home. But what about a united force?
United force?
If there was not one house but many houses attacking, then there was a far greater chance of victory. And so it was that the four greatest houses of the Elixni coordinated together. The Kells of the Houses of Devils, Kings, Winter, and Wolves would marshal their forces and send them to Earth. Together they would unite in the greatest host of Elixni that the galaxy had ever seen, ready to defeat the Guardians, break their walls, and reclaim the great machine at last. The exact number of fallen assembled in this battle is not made clear, but based on what little we know about the troop strength of the force being brought by the House of Wolves, it is easy to speculate that there must have been over 1 million fallen in this army. Such a tidal wave of a force would have eradicated the lost city for good were it not for the actions of two staunch heroes who stood strong in their roles, one as a sovereign and the other as a guardian. The houses began to make their moves.
Mara?
The House of Devils, Kings, and Winter would be able to mobilize their forces more quickly and assembled on Earth with some haste. But the House of Wolves was not in the inner system. They were in the Jovian moons, and they would need to pass through the asteroid belt with their many catches in order to reach Earth. It was in this moment that their Kell made a fatal error. He stopped their catches at the largest asteroid in the asteroid belt known as Ceres. What he didn't know was that this was firmly in the middle of the territory of the Awoken of the Reef. Mara Sov, the Awoken Queen, was presented with a choice in this moment. She could allow the wolves to pass through, thus allowing them to trample on Awoken's sovereignty and let the last city burn. Or she could intervene at this interruption and invasion, and she could put Awoken lives at risk in doing so. Mara had to choose to hide or to go to war, and Mara would choose war. Her devastating first strike on the House of Wolves made use of a tremendously powerful gravitational weapon, an ancient set of beings known as the Harbingers. The Harbingers were so powerful that they destroyed the asteroid of Ceres and left 500,000 dead from the House of Wolves in this first opening engagement. It is known as the Scatter, and it did exactly that. The Wolf Kell was amongst that number of dead, and in this sudden action, Mara had allowed herself to be embroiled in a conflict of her own, a conflict with the House of Wolves that would be known as the Reef Wars. Eventually, the House of Wolves would regroup under a powerful leader known as Skolas the Rabbit, but they were unable to continue onward to Earth until they had dealt with the Awoken threat. With that in mind, the Awoken had bought all the time that the city would need. But as we'll soon learn, even that almost wasn't enough. Mara Sov would continuously fight the House of Wolves to a standstill, up until the point at which one broke ranks with the Wolves. A scribe known as Varex the Loyal of House
this guy!
He saw that Mara Sov was a leader that might at least be able to ignite the Elixni's fires for loyalty and unite them under one banner. He gave her critical information that led to the defeat and capture of Skolas. Skolas would have called Varex a traitor, no doubt, but given that he'd already removed 2 of Varex's arms, I feel as though Varex might not necessarily have cared. The remaining wolves either bent the knee to Mara or were imprisoned alongside their Kell in Varex's new jail, a facility that would one day come to be known as the Prison of Elders. With her victory here, Mara Sov had denied one of the fallen houses from an ability to attack Earth and potentially reclaim the Great Machine.
You're right.
But she had also denied the greatest possible reinforcements in the system for the houses of Kings, Winter, and Devils. Now there were only 3 houses instead of 4, but regardless, this was still the largest Elixni army that had ever been marshaled. Quickly, the last city's defense had to be organized. Lord Saladin Forge was in command with his protégés, Commander Zavala and Lord Shaxx. As the last of the Iron Lords, aside from Lady Ephrodite, who had fled long ago, Saladin was well prepared for a siege, and he had great degrees of experience. But so did Lord Shaxx, and Shaxx also had an uncanny ability to see when a battle could be turned, something which would happen in the greatest and most heated moment.
I wish I could do the Mara cutscenes.
In the end, the actions of a single fire team, Shaxx's fire team, would determine victory or defeat that day, and that fire team was present at the weakened part of the city's defenses that Osiris had pointed out to the speaker himself, at Twilight Gap. Here, Lord Shaxx was forced to hold the line, which he quickly saw was starting to buckle and break. Saladin also noted this, and believed that this would be where the tide broke through. If they broke through, it would be the end of humanity. The forces of the Elixni would overwhelm the city, and none would survive. Lord Saladin made the awful choice of sounding a general retreat to the city's Ridgeback district, believing that that might be the only place they could hold back the fallen. But Lord Shaxx knew that with such a move, doom would be guaranteed for the lost city, and so he disobeyed Lord Saladin. Alongside his fire team, Shaxx held the line, dying over and over, back to back, until eventually reinforcements could arrive. Legends were born that day, not least amongst them.
Oh, really? The shivers are up.
The same Anna Bray who had designed Rasputin in the Golden Age. She had been risen by the light of the Traveler, and had seen her name tag and badge on her person.
She's alive.
She was risen. She would remember her name, and so would many others, thanks to her actions in the battle that day. Wherever her golden gun shot, a whisper of the Traveler's light would be left.
That is so cool!
Would still be present to this day. It was also in this battle
the golden gun
death, so that she might explore more of the legacies of her own family's past without the interference of the last city. The battle was fierce. But eventually the Guardians, with their rallied forces, would push the Elixni back, and the counterattack was decisive enough to help break the Fallen's charge for good. Lord Shaxx and his fire team had saved the last city. The losses from the battle were staggering. A whole generation of Guardians was devastated, in more ways than can be imagined. The Battle of the Twilight Gap would change the lost city forever. It marked a point of remembrance and a turning point in our story. The Guardians had held their own in an age of great uncertainty, but now the true danger of their foes was also made more clear than ever. Some chose to look on Twilight Gap with remembrance. Basil Crux and Victor Lomar, two of the city's great industrialists and the creators of the Crux Lomar Foundry, would use this opportunity to design a new weapon of war in commemoration of the battle.
Oh, it looks beautiful.
Forged from the armor and light of Guardians that had fallen that day.
Oh.
It was said to ring out with the power of the Fallen, giving voice to their strife once more.
That looks cool. I want it.
Others looked upon the Twilight Gap's events and saw the city's place as being ascendant. Never again would the Elixni assemble a force of this size, and never again would they invade the city with the lofty dream of reclaiming the Traveler. They would be a broken people completely from this point onward.
Nice!
Others saw that the battle had left the city weak, and endeavored to protect it against even those recovering foes that were on their way. None would make a greater mark in this regard than Saint 14. With the blessing of the speaker, and with a certain fury in his heart, Saint 14 viciously hunted the Elixni across the system, becoming a legendary monster in their eyes. He hunted down the leaders and Kells who had fought at Twilight Gap, killing as many as he could get his hands on. These would be known as the Crusades of Saint 14, and they would come to a close when he went to battle the Kell of the House of Devils. At the time, the Devils were led by Sulcus, whose might was so great that he managed to grab the Titan and hoisted him clean from his feet, choking the life from him. In a famously Titan move, Saint 14 summoned all the power he could, ready for one last strike in melee. There was just enough space to land the blow. But it wasn't a punch. Winding back his neck, Saint 14 headbutted Sulcus, the Kell of the House of Devils, so hard that this single strike was enough to cave in the Kell's skull, killing him instantly. Saint 14's helmet still has a dent from this fabled incident that can be seen even to this day. He was ready to return to the last city, but then the speaker contacted him with new information. Osiris had been seen on Mercury. The Titan changed course and went to search for his friend, his lover.
What?
He would find his way to
Saint 14 and Osiris was a thing?
Simulation engine that Osiris had begun to enter and study. Into the deepest recesses of the Infinite Forest, Saint 14 would disappear. His seat on the Vanguard would be left empty for a time, for he did not return. Soon it was filled by Commander Zavala, and it was assumed that Saint 14 had been lost. Legends had begun to disappear. At this point the city was still weakening. A rot was setting in, and it was in this moment that, smelling the blood of the city, the Concordat would rise and make things so much worse. The exact reason behind their rebellion isn't well known. Much of their history has been scrubbed from the last city's records. What we do know is that they rose to overthrow the Speaker and the Consensus. Their betrayal would lead to the ascension of a faction that replaced them, the future War Cult. Their revolution was short-lived, and they were finally defeated in one of the last city's towers by the Guardians and forces of New Monarchy. The Concordat and its leader Lysander would retreat into the wild, where they have remained ever since. Even to this day, when the Witnesses' forces crowd all around us, we still know Lysander is out there, somewhere. With so much calamity and so much conflict, Lord Shaxx felt it necessary to act. He put a proposal to the Consensus. Guardians had always sparred against each other. As immortal beings with incredible might, they were able to resurrect after their deaths. Dying was not necessarily a problem for a Guardian unless their ghost was also killed, and so there became a culture. Guardians would fight against each other and learn from their mistakes. Combats were sometimes collectively referred to as the Crucible, and these moments of fighting and infighting were often used to settle disagreements in a martial manner. Some Guardians, such as Ikora Rey, were notorious combatants in this regard. It was Lord Shaxx who proposed a formalization of the Crucible under his watchful eye. He would organize matches to pit Guardian against Guardian, thus allowing their existing ranks to train in an environment where their deaths were not punished permanently. The consensus would agree to allowing the Crucible to be conducted, and Crucible matches would become a part of the Last City's culture, with Guardians of all stripes gaining fame and fortune for their performance in the arenas of Lord Shaxx. The citizens of the Last City would
Can a Guardian feel pain?
Or would show up if some of those arenas were able to be viewed in person. Factions and weapon foundries would sponsor Guardians who were willing to bear their colors or insignias into battle. Betting on Crucible matches became a relatively common pastime, and fans would develop loyalties or attachments to individuals or teams that performed well within Shaxx's Crucible. With the Crucible being truly formalized, now what had merely been sparring sessions could be turned into a true training avenue. A new generation of Guardians were being put to the test and were being readied for war. But there was still some time before these Guardians would be ready, and the old guard would suffer some terrible fates before their replacements could come in to take the reins. The most notable of these was Angel Trainee. He had volunteered to become the Hunter Vanguard after losing a bet with his close friend Cade 6.
Cade 6?
Cade had killed a terrible fallen mercenary called Tannix the Scarred, and had bet with his friend Angel that he'd do it first. Angel lost that bet, and that's why he had the desk job, the Hunter Vanguard position, the one job no hunter truly wants. The only problem was that Tannix was more machine than monster, and wasn't so easily killed. He would swiftly return to the fold time and time again, until he got lucky one day, and ended the life of Angel Trainee and his ghost. Cade realized his error, and realized that it was his overconfidence that had effectively gotten his friend killed. In a moment of reverent self-sacrifice and a dedication of duty, Cade took up Angel's cloak. To know the significance of this moment, you need to understand the significant part of hunter culture that their cloaks represent. They are full of meaning and stories. They are a representation of you as a person. When a hunter cuts apart his lesser's cloaks and adds it to their own, it is a proclamation of dominance. When a hunter's cloak is emblazoned with the insignia of their posse or faction, they are proclaiming undying loyalty. And when a hunter takes up the cloak of his fallen comrade, it is a vow. And Cade vowed to honor the memory and sacrifice of his fallen friend. And so not only did he take Angel's cloak, but he also volunteered to be the next Hunter Vanguard. As time in the City Age dragged on, things slowly began to fall into decay. When
Naked Man, holy crap!
And finished, there were 8 towers that perched along its circumference, each manned by Guardians, Frames, FOTC Force members, and members of the Stoneborn.
What is FOTC?
It was bristling with guns. It was well defended. But as the City Age started to come to a close, all but one of these towers had fallen into disrepair and had been abandoned. The enemies of the city were beginning to close in. The time of the great City Age heroes had seemingly come to an end. An old and familiar kind of darkness began to creep in from the edges of the system, known at the time only to a select few, including a single Cloudstrider known as Rohan, who had found a backdoor into the Black Garden. A terrible kernel of darkness had been planted. A false copy of the Veil had been created, a copy that had been nurtured by the Vex of the Black Garden, and had been nothing but a source of poison for the Traveler. With this new darkness rising, and no one knowing of it, the Traveler's light began to dim. A warrior of great strength and resolve would be needed to deliver humanity from the
Osiris was right.
Treacherous time, and their prayers were answered. One day, a ghost continued its search
That's
for its guardian.
nice!
Trekking across the wastelands of the old Cosmodrome at Baikonur, the wastes that were now referred to as Old Russia. Here, amongst the rusting cars and unassuming bones of the collapse, on a small hill just before the old Cosmodrome's walls, they found something. They found hope. They found you. And with you, the whole world would be changed forever.
Eyes up, Guardian. I'm your ghost. Woo! Bravo! 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 Destiny 1 starts next time. Ooh. Next time we do this, it's us. It's such a clean break. Bife really did a really good job here. This is such a good goddamn lore video. I love this. Such a really good lore video. How long is the next segment? It's it's just a few minutes. But can we finish the entirety of Destiny 1 next video? Yeah. Next time on Destiny Lore, it's Destiny 1, the entirety of Destiny 1. So if you would like to continue watching with us, you can wait for the next video, which will probably be Sunday. Or you can play Destiny with us in the Discord. We play Destiny there. Last night we played it for hours. And I'll see you later today, won't I? Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you very much. Otsu Destiny. Bye-bye.